This Week in Virology, the podcast about viruses, the kind that make you sick. Hello, ASV. It's really the best you can do. You know, at ASM, they did better 2 weeks ago. Ooh, that's right. You're going to hear about ASM today. Hello, ASV. Hello. Right. Way to go. From Microbe TV, this is TWIV, This Week in Virology, episode 558, recorded on July 22nd, 2019. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you're listening to the podcast all about viruses. We are recording today from Minneapolis, Minnesota. We're on the campus of the University of Minnesota, and we are at ASV 2019, the annual meeting of the American Society for Virology. And I have with me some of our usual TWIV co-hosts and two very special guests who are going to talk to us all about the history of this amazing organization. So let me introduce the players today. On my left, from Brew University, Brianne Barker.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here.
Brianne's the newest member of the TWIV team. What year did you join us?
About 2 years ago,
2
year and a
years.
half.
Okay. I had made a statement. We would like more people to join, and Brianne was one of the people who said, I'll join. And so here she is. Then over to my left further, he's an emeritus professor, University of Florida, Gainesville, currently residing in Austin, Texas, Rich Condit.
Hi, Vincent. Hi, everybody. It's 75 degrees out today. Beautiful sunny day. That's 24 Celsius. It's a good day for golf.
Not golfing right now, Rich. You can go afterwards. Okay.
I already had 15 holes.
I got in the elevator on Saturday when the sessions were supposed to begin, and he and someone else who I will not name had their golf clubs. And they said, we're going to study. All the way at the end there, from southeastern Michigan, Kathy Spindler.
Hi, everybody.
And we have two guests, and we're going to chat with them about this very cool organization that's called the American Society for Virology. Closest to me, she's a past ASV, no, she's not closest to me, sorry, farther from me. She's a past ASV president, professor emeritus at the Feinberg School of Medicine of Northwestern University, Pat Spear.
Hello, everybody. Delighted to be here.
Pat's a recent discoverer of TWIV, right?
Yes, yes.
Probably when I asked you to join us, you discovered us.
That's exactly right. When you asked me to join this event, I decided I'd sign on and see what they're all about, and I really enjoyed the ones I listened to.
You listened to all 557?
No.
No.
I listened to the last 2 or 3.
Okay. Better late than never.
Yeah.
And also joining us, he was the Secretary-Treasurer of ASV for over 20 years. He's an adjunct professor at the Medical College of Wisconsin, Sid Grossberg. Welcome. This is Sid's second time on TWIV. How about that? You remember the first time, Sid?
I do indeed. It was at the Medical College of Wisconsin.
Exactly. All right, so these two individuals have a long history with ASV. We're going to talk to them about the founding of this society. You probably don't know the history. It's a pretty cool history. It's an amazing society. We have an amazing meeting. Let's go to the roots. Before we get into that, as I said before, it's a 10th TWIV at ASV. The first one was in Bozeman in 2010. That was TWIV number 92. So that was the first one in front of an ASV audience with soda cans. TWIV started just a few years earlier in 2008. And finally, if you really like what we do on TWIV, please consider supporting us financially. Go to microbe.tv/contribute. Now this meeting of ASV, this 2019 meeting, is in honor of Bill Yachlik, who passed away just a few weeks ago. And he was, as you will see, essential in getting this society started. And so you'll be hearing his name throughout today as well. And of course, finally, that's a t-shirt. That's a TWIV t-shirt hanging there. I have 9 more here on the floor, and you don't have to buy them. All you have to do is stay to the end, because I'm going to throw them out. We'll all throw some out at the end, okay? You can buy them. They're actually designed by Sharon Isern of Florida Gulf Coast University. They are our 2018 TWIV World Tour t-shirts. We went to a lot of places last year, and they're all listed on the back of the shirt. And why give the World Tour shirts just to rock bands? Why can't virologists have World Tour t-shirts? So we have some. We're going to toss them out at the end. So I would like to know from Sid and Pat just a little bit about your histories before we start, so everyone can put you in context. I know, Sydney, you were here and talked about this a little bit on TWIV. Did you spend your entire career as a professor at MCW?
No, and it didn't even feel that way. No, actually, I should say something about ASV, and as a reassurance to Kathy Spindler. I was 23 years Secretary-Treasurer, and I want to reassure Kathy that the first 23 years are the hardest.
Thanks, Sid.
No, do you really want me to go through the whole thing?
No, not the whole thing, no. I want you were at Medical College of Wisconsin for most of your career, is that correct?
Yes, most. So I went to undergraduate in medical school at Emory University in Atlanta. Did my internship and residency at Duke University Hospital. Couple of years in the Army Medical Corps. Then fellowship with Bob Wagner, played an illustrious role in helping establish the society at Johns Hopkins. And then junior faculty for 3 years on an NIH postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Minnesota, where 3 years of my life was in the Mayo Building on the 9th floor. Subsequently invited to Cornell University Medical College in the Department of Microbiology, and then took off a year to go to the Pasteur Institute with Andrei Lvov, who won the Nobel Prize at the end of my year with him. I assure you that it was unrelated. Although it didn't hurt my CV at all. Then invited to take the chair in microbiology at the Medical College of Wisconsin, which I did with great humility and success for 31 years. And then an additional 9 years, so long as my grant funds continued, I was kept on, and now emeritus professor of microbiology, the Walter Schrader Emeritus Professor, until now.
I bet you could tell stories about Andrei Lvov, right? But we don't want you to do that now, but we could spend an entire TWIV, right?
Yeah.
Apparently so.
Well, I actually, one of his statements I would like to quote, but I would like to do that as a part of my prepared speech.
Okay. Very good. Pat, can you tell us a little bit about your history?
Sure. I did my undergraduate studies at Florida State University. There's some people there who recognize that place. Then I went to graduate school at the University of Chicago, got my PhD there in microbiology, did another 2 years there as a postdoc, and then went on to Rockefeller University for more postdoc with Gerald Edelman. He got his Nobel Prize while I was there, too. Nothing whatever to do with me. Then went back to the University of Chicago to be on the faculty and rose through the ranks there to full professor. Then I was invited to Northwestern to chair the Department of Microbiology and Immunology there, the first woman chair. I was also the first woman hired. I was also the first woman hired into my department at the University of Chicago, believe it or not. But anyway, and then I was chair for 16 years, half the time that Sid spent on the job, 16 years, and stayed on the faculty for another 5 years or so before I retired.
So I know, Pat, you identify yourself with herpes viruses, correct?
Correct.
Sid, do you identify yourself with any particular family of viruses?
Well, I guess my career was multifactorial. By great luck, which is a separate story, when I was in the Army, I was assigned to the 406 Medical General Laboratory outside of Tokyo, and happened to be there when I was called. Well, so I was in the laboratory of the Department of Virus Diseases, and we were supposed to be studying Japanese encephalitis virus, which indeed we did. But by virtue of a radio telephone call from the USS Shangri-La, the medical officer who called and said that in 1957, in April of 1957, a few days out of the port of Hong Kong, where there had been an explosion of respiratory disease, and about 4 days on his way to Japan, there was an explosion of respiratory disease, and he wanted to know whether it would be permissible to allow any of the sailors who clearly were infected with some kind of respiratory disease onto the Japanese mainland. And I said, for goodness sake, don't discriminate against American sailors. Let the healthy ones go ashore. There's so many other travelers coming into the Japanese islands. Let the healthy ones go ashore. But may I take sick call with you tomorrow morning? And he said, sure, come ahead. And from the first 10 throat washings, we recovered 4 of the first strains of the pandemic strain of Asian influenza, which then one of which, A2 Japan 30557 was incorporated, formed the basis for the United States vaccine in 1957, before influenza hit the North American continent by about 3 months. The first time in history that a vaccine had been prepared against the, in this case, the attack on the North American continent.
All right. All right.
So that was influenza. And by virtue of influenza, I was also introduced in Bob Wagner's laboratory at Hopkins to the phenomenon of interferon. And I remember when I gave a talk at the University of California, San Francisco, that a very eminent polio virologist told me at the end of my talk, he was so glad to hear that interferon was not really a gas.
All right, let's talk about ASV. I mean, we could obviously talk about other cool things for a long time. Maybe we have to get you back, Sid. But let's talk about ASV, the founding. I want to start off by asking you how the idea to form ASV arose.
Well, first of all, as the co-author of this paper that I wrote with Bill Yachlik, and Bill invited me to write it with him, for which I was very grateful and honored. And it was really a lot of fun to do it with Bill. And I never thought that very many people would be actually invited to read this paper, as ASV, on their own good judgment, decided to hand out the copies to all of the members of this group. I never thought that anybody would read the paper, and it's possible with this kind of distribution, maybe some of you did. So I'm very thankful to the Society for this. But Andrei Lvov was quoted in an article and an essay in the Foundations of Molecular Biology that I recommend to you. He said one of the worst punishments in the life of a scientist is to have to reread his earlier papers. There's so many ways to, I read it now, and there's so many ways that it could be improved, which makes me think of, with the adjoining presence of the Mississippi River, of Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, who said, I could have made it shorter if I had had more time. It's a very long paper. So how did ASV come to be? Well, it's a part of an evolutionary manifestation of humankind to aggregate and to form groups as identities among the population, that is, sub-identities, come to be, as witness the guilds during the Middle Ages, where just as we are doing right now, learning what the newest techniques are, attempting to apply them, this time not for money, but for glory, for the good of mankind, and womankind. So it's a perfectly evolutionary human thing as groups of specialized experts and the necessity for maintaining currency, I think, justifies the formation of the society. The other evolutionary or historical fact was with the growth of virology, with the studies that came out of the preceding century, there were more people involved in virology, and it became obvious that one needed a greater density of groups in order to learn from one another the newest techniques, the newest concepts. And so, interestingly, in a sense, counter to much evolutionary theory and observation, the first societies that were established were international. But that was a matter of numbers. There weren't enough virologists in any particular locale, like North America, necessarily, to form a group. And so the first societies then that did form were international. Well, that was thanks to the International Association of Microbiological Associations. And when a small group of virologists in the 1960s petitioned the International Association of Microbiological Societies at the meeting in 1966 to establish a separate section as a part of the microbiological overarching category to form a section of virology. Under due consideration, they decided no. So that acted as an impetus, actually, for a group of virologists at that time, an international group, including Niels Åkerblom, as well as Joe Melnick and some few others, to have an International Congress of Virology in 1968 in Helsinki. Thanks to Åkerblom at Helsinki, and then a subsequent one 3 years later in Budapest. There had been already discussions at that time in the 1960s, late 1950s, that it was important to begin to try to get virologists together. And thanks to a small group of, actually, a number of department chairs in microbiology who were virologists, as well as some officers of the American Society of Microbiology, that became the nidus of energy to think about having a society. And so when Bill Yaklik, then who ran as president, as a candidate for the presidency of the American Society for Microbiology, got defeated by Ken Burns. I think that may have planted an idea that Bill had to have his own.
Breakaway.
But thanks to Bill, thanks to his energy, drive, the clarity of his judgment, the clarity of his science, that he got a number of people that actually had positions of power, not only in the American Society for Microbiology, but in academic departments. And so that group then began to coalesce and move forward to establish the society. I think that so the final factor, actually, which was also evolutionary, was the American Society for Microbiology. Thanks to the American Society for Microbiology, there was a recognition of the importance of virology. But there was numbers again, the concentration of virologists in the pool, the mass of microbiological members was a factor of 5 to 10% of the population of ASM were virologists. And so the dilutional effect, the multiplicity was low. And so that meant a dilution of resources, a dilution of power. We couldn't really decide very easily. We were always invited to participate, but then the fact of the dilution at national meetings was such that it was difficult for virologists to get together. The opportunity for virologists to encounter one another was, of course, diminished by the dilutional effect. And besides that, there was money. The money problem was manifest in many ways, including the fact that the ASM meeting was so large. And so that meant that they had to be in cities. They had to have all of the resources to accommodate the thousands of people that would attend the national ASM meetings. And so we felt this was bad for students, for postdocs, junior scientists at every level that just didn't have the finances to attend such a meeting. And there was inadequate support, therefore, for virological students. And so all of these factors then came together in the motivation for having a separate society for virologists. I think that does it.
Okay.
Pat, I'd like to ask you if at the time you thought forming the ASV was a good idea. Did you think there were any downsides to forming it?
Well, let me give you a little my history in relation to what Sid just said. At the time of that first International Congress for Virology in Helsinki, I was a postdoc, and I was able to attend. And at the time of the organization of the American Society for Virology, I was a associate professor. And I was able to be involved in that meeting mainly because I happened to be in Chicago, and that's where the organizational meeting was.
This is the 1981 organizational meeting.
1981 organizational meeting was held at a seedy hotel right outside of O'Hare in Chicago.
And who called that meeting?
Bill Yocklet. Yes, Bill Yocklet called that meeting, and as far as those, I mean, I would have to say I was somewhat on the outside of this organization. It looked as if Bill and Sid were the main organizers, and they had an ad hoc group of people that were organizing it. Now, as to the question you just asked me, whether I thought it was a good idea, so I was an associate professor. You know, what did I know? But the only professional organization I knew was the ASM, and I did go to the ASM meetings, even though I was unhappy with many aspects of the meetings, just like Sid spoke about. There were very few virologists, there was very little support for virology, but I was concerned that that starting a separate organization would harm the ASM, and I thought, well, this is our professional organization, and we have to be careful that we don't harm the ASM. But after the fact, I have to say Bill and the other organizers were absolutely correct. We needed that organization, and we needed it in large part because the organization was formed mainly, I think, to have this annual meeting. And this annual meeting is extremely important, and it's particularly important for postdocs and students to be able to come and present their work. And this meeting was always envisioned as a meeting to allow to be relatively inexpensive, to be held on college campuses, and to allow students and postdocs to come and present their work. And so I think it's admirably fulfilled its role, and I was wrong, and Bill Yocklet was right, of course.
I want to just point out that we have a document here that's the people that attended that organizational meeting in Chicago. They signed it, their names and their affiliations, and Pat Spear and Sid Grossberg are both on the first page of signatures, of course.
Yeah, that's a really cool document, part of the archives of ASV. I have to just say that, so that meeting happened in 1981, correct?
Yes.
So I was at a Gordon conference that summer, and Harry Ginsberg, at a break, got up and said, we're going to have a meeting to talk about a new society.
And when was that Gordon conference?
That was the summer of 81.
What month?
June, probably, I guess.
Because June is when this meeting was.
I don't know if it was before or after that
Yeah,
meeting.
yeah.
It might have been slightly before that. But of course, I was a postdoc and I had no idea what
Yeah.
society was. I just wanted to
Yeah.
do my experiments, right?
Yeah.
Rich.
So I'm interested in, from both of you, Pat and Sid, your recollections of that meeting. Like, how many people were there? What was the tone? What's your recollection of what happened?
Well, so we felt that it was important to allow the officers of the American Society for Microbiology to make their pitch to this group. Of course, ASM was very unhappy. As has been pointed out, it represented a splintering. But I should remind you of the continuing support from ASM, as was illustrated in the data that Kathy Spindler showed at the business meeting this morning, that ASM continues to support not only a lecturer every year, but also in continuing gifts of various sorts, in particular this meeting this week. So we had the then current president of ASM and the president to be, as well as the executive secretary of ASM. And they were each given the opportunity to present their pitch, their concern, and there was an open discussion. It was then, let's see, there were 40 people in attendance, at least on the roster, and there was then a vote, and 38 were in favor and 2 were opposed to establishing ASV. Bill rightfully designated that day as the birthday of the ASV.
So that's June
June the 9th,
1981.
1981.
And that left, as a result of that, so moving forward, Bill becomes interim president, right?
Well, so we had to have at least a pro tem organization of some sort. So out of that same group that attended there, as well as a few others, they established a functional organizing committee, and he points out, I think in the paper that you have, that they met frequently, usually in New York City, and all the members of that committee paid for all the expenses of having these meetings, so that there was no charge of the $21,000 that had been collected from the over 650 members that instantly signed up, essentially as a result of a mailing to all of the names and addresses that we had available. But it was because the senior members, the most senior members of the virological community, David Baltimore, Harry Ginsberg, Bob Wagner, Bob Hazelcorn, absolutely. And so that brings up the point that there were essentially all of the different kinds of virus entities were represented. So the bacterial virologists, people that were studying phage, people that were involved in the practice of clinical virology from the infectious disease organization, the Infectious Diseases Society, represented by Ken McIntosh, and these were senior people that also had access to funds. I counted up 20 out of the 40 names in that original meeting that were department chairs or heads of virological units that were well supported. And where did those funds come from? From the National Institutes of Health. And as a matter of fact, one of the members attending that, although there were some scientists from the NIH, George Galasso, who was an administrator in NIAID, was also present and also lent his support to this the establishment of this entity.
So was your plan originally to have an annual meeting? Was that part of the reason why you founded the society?
I would say yes.
I
This
would
is-
say that was the main purpose,
Absolutely.
a principal purpose, yes.
That continues to be really the primary function, right? Is the annual meeting.
Just because I'm looking over this list, most people signed their affiliation, and when Sid was just talking about the 20 out of 40 of them being department chairs, one person also added their department, so I'm suspecting that plant virology was represented because they indicated plant pathology department. So again, the breadth
Absolutely.
of virology was
Absolutely.
there.
I just have to make a comment about this list because the reason we have this here right now is because I spent a little time as archives chair, and as part of that, I went and visited the archive, which is one big cardboard file box at the Bancroft Library in Berkeley. Okay, and I spent an afternoon with it, just sort of flipping through it. And I came across this. It's on the original is on yellow legal paper. Okay, and I was just tripping through this, a bunch of boring correspondence and stuff, and I ran across this list. And I'm a virology nerd. Okay, and looking down this list of names, historical names that I'll recognize, I'm getting goosebumps right now. It's pretty amazing. Have a look if you have a chance.
So Sid, you mentioned that you got over 500 people right away. So there was a really good response. Was that sustained for a long time?
Oh, absolutely. And people kept on joining all the time. And one of the best parts of this was the enormous enthusiasm for this society. I mean, everybody just felt driven and so enthusiastic. It was really a wonderful thing to be a part of. And to the extent that people were willing to spend money out of their own pocket to help get us started.
There's a great figure in this paper, figure 1, to show the growth of the society up until 2006. It's called a multi-step growth curve. They obviously had a sense of humor back then.
No, I take complete responsibility for that. Bill was devoted to single cycle growth curves, but I said, this is a wonderful representation of a multi-step, and he even allowed me to keep that term in there. Oh, there was another thing about how this paper was written. Bill, those of you that saw the poster just outside the Northrop auditorium or in the lobby, Bill was born and reared, at least in his earlier years, but learned to speak, of course, German. And in the first drafts of this manuscript, so many, as was the usual practice in formal German writing, was to capitalize all the nouns. And so many of them showed up in that, and I couldn't help but tease Bill at great risk to my life that we just couldn't write this in German. And so the compromise was that we would capitalize only the V in virology and the V in virologists, which is why they're all capitalized in this.
I wondered about that. That's great to hear. Kathy?
So I think we were trying to ask how the officers were selected, or how was the leadership selected then in the formation of the society?
Well, again, it was the small organizing group that decided that we certainly needed to begin, they needed to begin putting a real organization together with not only officers, but actually essentially a board of trustees to satisfy the requirements for a 501c3. The IRS designation for a charity organization. And so all of the formal requirements for establishing such a corporation had to be met. So there were unfortunately not very many women involved. Dorothy Horseman was a major player. She was infectious disease specialist at Yale, and she was one of the primary movers in that committee to draft the bylaws. We've done away with this, though I treasure this directory that still is interestingly up to date with regard to email addresses as well. But directory, it's one of the last that were printed. And in the front part is a statement, and we wanted to have a part of this directory to contain the bylaws and the listings for historical purposes, the previous locations of every annual meeting, at least up to 2005, and the preceding presidents up to that time. And there were three presidents that were women. And I really want to make a point that from the very beginnings of the society, there was a great interest on the part of the formers to enhance, attract women into the profession and to allow them the opportunity for growth. And so there are three presidents out of the first almost 20, and among them, let's see, was Gail Wertz, Mary Estes, and Sandra Schlesinger. And Sandra is the one.
And there's a fourth right there.
Oh, Pat Spear. Absolutely. I'm sorry. I apologize. And Sandra established the archives. It is she who approached the University of California, Berkeley, to establish the archives, which Rich had commented.
Getting back to the original officers, Sid, in your paper, you point out that I guess some of the ad hoc committees devised a nominating committee that did their work in time for the first ASV meeting in Cornell, right? And wasn't that when the first set of officers was elected? Yes, it was pro tem up until that point. That's correct.
So I'm interested in Bill Yaklich's role in this. Did he emerge? I mean, he emerged early as a leader in this whole thing. Did he really step in and motivate the whole thing? How did he wind up in such a leadership role?
Well, I think the fact was that he was editor-in-chief of the first journal, Virology, that made it kind of obvious.
Yeah, gave
that,
him
he
the
was
impetus.
It was only after the establishment of virology that ASM finally acquiesced to have a separate journal for, like, the Journal of Virology as a not exactly a competing one, but we had to publish in all manner of non-virological journals. And it was a major step forward to have virology identified as the name of a journal, encourage the continued development of the science.
I think it was obvious to those of us, even those outside the original organizing groups, that Bill Yoklik was really the moving force behind it.
I want to point out that a lot of that history is found on the ASV webpage. The bylaws are found on the ASV webpage. And so you might want to take a look at some of that if you're sort of history inclined. We have a crack administrator in the ASV office, Andrea Garcia, and she manages that. But so we don't have paper copies of a lot of things anymore, but we do have it there on the web for you to check out.
And that's an excellent source of not only information about the society, but also about the history of the science. What Fred
Rapp?
No.
Murphy.
Fred
Murphy. What Fred Murphy put together, and it's pictorially so beautiful. He collected up since Fred was a was an electron microscopist, and he was able to put together a beautiful history, actually, of the development of infectious diseases and especially virology on that same website.
So Pat mentioned that the first ASV meeting was at Cornell. When was that meeting again?
That was the next summer, so it was 1982.
How was that meeting funded, and how many people attended?
I went. I don't know if at that point we were applying for NIH grants for meetings or not, but of course, as time went on, that was where you applied for money to NIH for meeting grants. And I don't know if that was done for that first meeting or not. Do you know, Sid?
I don't think that it was possible. It was
too soon.
It was too soon.
Too soon.
There were so many things. So there were elements that were autocatalytic in this. Having established the society, helped push the science, push the entity, the energy into this everything that was virological, and so there were then study sections formed. I mean, the recognition of a governing entity, a recognition of the validity of not of the science of the science validated itself, but that there was a category where there was a home for this science.
Yeah, I seem to recall that at that time, grant funds could be used to travel to meetings. It may be more difficult now, but at that time, you could use grant funds to travel to meetings. And so I suspect a lot of individuals use their grant money to go to that first meeting or to send their students or postdocs to that first meeting.
Absolutely.
All right, so we have about 10 minutes left for questions. So let's each do one. All right, and let me start with one. Sid, was after ASV was founded, was there any time in your tenure that it looked like it was not going to work?
Never. Never. The kinds of enthusiasm that were evident before the Big Bang that created this was carried forward I think, forever. And you're a representation of the success of it.
Okay, Kathy.
So I'm going to have two, sorry. But if either Pat or Sid, if you could tell us if you remember any major breakthroughs in virology that you first heard about at an ASV meeting.
So I put that question actually to Sandra Schlesinger, we didn't even think in terms of, we really didn't want to bother with a publicity committee. We established this in part for young people, in order to gain, as an educational undertaking, not only for the science, but opportunity for students and postdocs to learn how to present. Many were going to go into academia or in industry, but no matter where one went, one had to be proficient in teaching about one's experiments, one's science, and so that was part of my interest in fostering the society, helping it to grow as a basis for growing future faculty, future scientists. I guess that's enough.
Okay, so my second, go ahead, Pat.
Well, I don't know if I can remember something that was a great breakthrough, but I remember something that struck me very much. When you're president of the society, your main job is to organize a symposia at the meeting. And so when I was president, I had to organize a symposia, and I invited this fellow from the University of British Columbia to come and talk about viruses in the ocean. And it was just, it was an eye-opener for me. Viruses in the ocean. He talked about the number of whale equivalents of biomass of viruses in the ocean. It was just a great eye-opener to see and think about viruses in another totally different context.
And then maybe on a lighter note, if you could think of anything that really was funny that happened during a meeting, not in the after hours parts, but like just something that might have happened during a session.
I remember that that was one of the questions that had been posed to us beforehand, and I also asked Sandra Schlesinger if she could think of anything, and it wasn't a matter of confessing to anything, but we just couldn't think of anything that was really funny, except in the meeting at the University of Montana. We had as the, oh dear, I'm having a senior moment. The head of we had the president of the NIH. We had the director, Barmas. So Dr. Varmus was the keynote speaker, and he said he thought that ASB was a wonderful organization, but he really had to, and he talked about it in that vein for a few moments, and said, but he really thought that Sid Grossberg ought to do something about the length of the address. The address is just too long, and he had to write that every year in order to send his dues in. And he would like to have it shortened. Harry Ginsberg, I was sitting in the audience, the second row, and Harry turned to me to give a rejoinder. And I said, "Thy will be done."
Rich.
And
Oh, you're not done, sorry.
the response was, "Now that's the kind of respect I like to get."
So Pat, out of 40 people at this organizational meeting, you're one of 3 women. I'm interested
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I'm interested in your experience of the evolution of the role of women in the society and in science in general over the course of this.
Yeah, well, that's difficult to. I don't want to recount war stories. Everybody who's a woman of a certain age or who's a minority has plenty of war stories. I think you can see the progress that's been made just within the society itself. I mean, among the organizers, as Sid pointed out, there was one woman, Dorothy Horstman, who was very instrumental, but among about a dozen men. There was Priscilla Schaefer, who was one of the first counselors, so one of the first officers of the society. I looked at the program. The program of the symposia speakers this time, and noticed that at least half of the speakers were women. So that is remarkable progress from the way it was in the beginning. And there has been, I know some of that progress is due to the fact that there have been women who protested the fact that there didn't seem to be enough women speakers and enough women representation. But clearly there has been changes, and it's remarkable to see how many prominent women are now speaking at the American Society for Virology. To my account, at least half. So there's been big changes.
Brianne.
So when you think about the future of ASV, are there specific things that you really hope to preserve or places where you would like ASV to grow and change?
I think it should keep its emphasis on postdocs and students, and emphasis on being an inexpensive meeting to attend. I think that's been very good for the society and the field in general. I don't have anything to suggest to change.
I think it's a tribute to the adaptability of the format that was essentially established to take on additional activities. In the beginning, there weren't even abstracts. That obviously was a natural to add, and I think it was actually by the second meeting. But the appearance of posters, which actually was copied from other National Society meetings, for which there was a great deal of discussion as to whether it was a good thing or not. In a way, presenting a poster was like talking to your own weekly research group, people who were only interested in that subject, you could then talk to. But most of your life is, in fact, convincing people or teaching them about your science when only some of the listeners have the background to understand all that the ins and outs of what you were presenting. But at any rate, there are a number of things of which, for example, I was unaware, but I learned from Kathy Spindler's presentation at the business meeting, additions that have been made and introduced into this same format that shows a degree of the flexibility and the different initiatives that have been introduced by the society. I see that the society is still writing applications to the NIH to fund attendees, junior attendees to the international meetings. And I had the great pleasure, actually, and fun to write a number of those applications. And that was actually started by Joel Dalrymple, and he passed away, unfortunately, quite young, and I took over for a number of years. But again, adapting the activities of the society as they've become important to the mission of the society.
All right, I know everyone has a place to go, so let's wrap up. We could talk for a long time because there's a lot of good history here, but we won't. That's TWIV. You can find it on your favorite podcast player. Please subscribe if you haven't. It really helps us to have a lot of people subscribing. If you have questions or comments, twiv@microbe.tv. Consider supporting us. We do this on our own, pretty much. If you go to microbe.tv/contribute, we have ways where you could give us $1 a month, which is $1 you can't really use for anything else. What can you buy for $1? But here you will get 5 different wonderful science podcasts. Microbe.tv/contribute. Our guest today, talking about the history of ASV, Sid Grossberg. Thank you so much, Sid. Pat Spear, thank you for joining us. Brianne Barker is at Drew University. She's on Twitter, BioProf Barker. Thank you, Brianne.
Thank you. It was great to be here.
Kathy Spindler's at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks, this is a lot of fun.
Rich Condit, Emeritus Professor, University of Florida, Gainesville, currently residing in Austin, Texas. Thank you, Rich.
Thank you. That was a good time.
And I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.ws. I want to thank ASV for having us back for the 10th year and for their support of TWIV, and Ronald Jenkins for his music. And now let's give out some t-shirts. Here you go. Condit. Nope, sorry. Yeah, throw that one out. Condit, you got that last one? You've been listening to This Week in Virology. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week. Another TWIV is viral. Thank you.